Hello everyone, thank you once again for joining my class, and my name is Mr. Quresh. Today we are looking at living and non-living things. So by the time we finish this unit, we expect the other students to be able to differentiate between living and non-living things, state the characteristics of living things, differentiate between plants and animals, and differentiate also between groups of different organisms. So let us start by looking at living and non-living things. It says look at the following pictures and classify each item as a living or non-living. This is a picture of fire. Now, would you classify fire as living or non-living? And what are your reasons for that? And here is a young seedling of a plant. Is that living? And there's a car. Again, is that living or non-living? And there's a big whale. Is that also a living or non-living? So what are your reasons for saying which ones are living and which ones are non-living? So we will try to concentrate more on what things make things to be living. If we look at the fire, it's like as if it's moving. You can see the flame moving. The flame, they make more noise, like, they're talking, and they're using up energy, like they're feeding. But will that be enough to call them living things? This guy, we know, is using energy so that it can grow, and the car is also using energy. It's using fuel. You have to put fuel in the car so that it will burn that up, and the whale, of course, is also needing energy and other things. So which of them are living? We can see that the plant and the whale, these are living, but the fire and the car are not living. And what are our reasons for saying so? Let us look further. There are 7 characteristics that we use to help us understand what things are living and what are not living. That includes movement, respiration, nutrition, irritability, growth, excretion, and reproduction. As you're familiar, most of us use what we call a mnemonic. You use the first letter of each one to help you remember, because these are 7 words that might be a bit difficult for some to easily remember, but it's easier to remember Mr. Niger. Niger or Niger is a country in Africa, and then Mr. of course is a title, so Mr. Niger should be easier for us to remember. And once you have Mr. Niger, so you can easily go movement, respiration, nutrition, irritability, growth, excretion, and respiration. Now let us look at each of these word or term and try to understand their meanings. Movement. It is an action by an organism or part of an organism causing a change of position or place. So if an organism is able to move either part of its body or the entire body, that is considered movement. Respiration involves the chemical reactions that break down nutrient molecules in living cells so as to release energy. Right? When we say respiration, most children think about breathing. Yes, breathing is part of respiration, but breathing is not the only action that is respiration. Breathing is just taking gases that goes into the lungs. And then from the lungs, the gas needed, which is oxygen, will go into the blood. And once it is in the blood, that's when chemical reactions take place. And the oxygen is going to be used to release energy from the food that you have taken. And that is termed respiration. So simply, respiration is a process by which energy is released by chemical reactions in the body. Next is nutrition. Now, this is taking in of nutrients, food that contain chemicals that call nutrients. Taking in of nutrients, which are organic substances and are mineral ions containing the raw materials or energy for growth and tissue repair, absorbing and assimilating them. Sunlight is usually involved in the process because plants need it to make food, and then we now use that food that is prepared by the plant so that we can eat them. And most importantly, we use the energy for growth and to maintain our body tissues. So in brief, that's nutrition, the process of taking in nutrients and using them so that we can grow and repair our bodies. Irritability is simply the ability to detect or sense changes in the environment. That change in the environment is referred to as stimulus, plural, you say stimuli, and to make responses. So you detect the change in the environment and then you react accordingly to the change in the environment. Here is a sample. This plant responds to the environment by growing toward light. This plant has been placed in a dark room, and then a source of light has been placed next to it, so we can see the plant is growing towards the light. So it means the plant is sensing the change in environment and it is responding by growing towards the light. Growth is a permanent increase in size and dry mass by an increase in cell number or cell size or both. Now, it's very important to understand this dry mass. You will see some animals like donkey or camel. When they drink water, their size increases dramatically. They increase by a large amount. That's not the dry mass. The dry mass refers to the body, the normal amount of materials that are in the body, including water itself, minus when you just all of a sudden take a huge volume of water, because all of that water, or most of it, is going to be taken out of the body. So when you talk about growth, we're looking at permanent increase in size. Okay? And it can also refer to the number of cells that are increasing or the size of the cells. Let us look at a picture of a plant here. It starts from a seed, and there you have the seed, germinating, producing leaves and stems and root, and gradually you can see the height is changing, the size of the leaves, it's also changing. They are becoming gradually bigger and bigger. That is growth. Excretion is the removal from organisms of the waste products of metabolism. Metabolism involves all the chemical reactions in cells, including respiration and substances that are in excess of requirement. To make it simple, excretion is the removal of waste products of metabolism. We have many organs involved in it, but the one that is most prominent is the urinary system, where you have the kidney and the bladder and the tubes that connect them. They are involved in the process of removing most of the wastes from our body. Reproduction is the process by which organisms make more of their own kind. We have this animal, and you have a little baby on top of it that it produced. So just to give us an idea of reproduction, this guy was there alone. Now it has made its own kind, but of course with the help of a mate. So the idea is reproduction is the process by which organisms are going to multiply themselves. So in summary, these are the 7 characteristics. All organisms are expected to be able to do all of this. They should be able to move, they should be able to carry out respiration, they need energy, and they should be able to respond to changes in the environment. They should change, grow, change in size, or change in number. And they should be able to reproduce themselves. They should be able to take out waste materials that result from the activities they are doing. And when we look at nutrition, that's the means by which they are collecting food. If I should take you back to our first page, which was asking you, look at the following pictures and classify each item as living or non-living. Now, the fire can do most of the characteristics we've looked at. The same for the car, because the car can take fuel. You can consider that as food. The car burns oxygen so it can run, so we can consider that as respiration. It gives out waste. from the exhaust you see smoke and dust particles coming out. It is nowadays the cars that are coming, they are sensitive. They can detect when objects are in the path, or they are able to detect when temperatures are changing and so on. You can see I've named almost all the characteristics, but there are two of them. Let's go back to the characteristics. You can see it's able to move, of course. It can carry out respiration by using oxygen to burn the fuel. The fuel itself, it is taken as food, feeding. It is sensitive to changes in the environment, but it cannot grow. The car cannot grow. It cannot change size. And it's able to excrete, take out waste, smoke, and dust from the exhaust. But reproduction, it cannot do. So because it's not able to grow and it is not able to reproduce itself, therefore, it cannot be considered a living thing. So anything that you want to think of as a living or non-living, ask yourself those questions. Is it able to carry out all the 7 activities? If yes, then it is living. If it is no, then it is not living. Now, don't forget, non-living things can be divided into 2 groups. What are these 2 groups? We have those that were never part of living thing. Examples will be the gold and the stone. And then we have the second group, those which were once part of living things. We have coal, and there we have paper, and of course jam. Now, coal came from dead plants, that were dead millions of years, and they undergo some process until they became gold. Paper we get from trees, jam we get from fruits. Now, these were once part of living things, but now they are not living. So this is how we divide living things, non-living things. We say those that were never living, and those that were part of or were once living things, and now they are no more living. More about coal. We say it's a good example because it was formed when trees died and sank into the soft ground. This is how they were made. And this happened millions of years ago when the earth was covered with forests. Paper is non-living, but it is made from trees. Jam is also a non-living thing, but we know it's made from fruits of plants. So that's the division between living things that were once living and others that were never living. So how do we group things? We're going to look at living things and try to group them, sorting them according to their similarities, okay? So grouping living things is simply sorting out of the living things into groups according to their structural similarities. For all living things, this is the modern system of classification today. So here we have the living organism, and in one of our lessons we said you have the kingdom Monerans or prokaryote. Prokaryotes are organisms that don't have true nucleus. And then you have the kingdom Protista, kingdom Fungi, kingdom Plantae, and the kingdom Animalia. Now each of these is further divided or subdivided into smaller groups. But just to help us understand, in the kingdom Prokaryote or the Monerans, that's where you have bacteria as an example. The protists, we have those that are plant-like and those that are animal-like. So the plant-like, we have algae, and the animal-like, we have the protozoans. If you come to the kingdom Fungi, that one is just one big group. They don't have much subdivisions. But if you come to kingdom Plantae, we have the flowering, non-flowering, and then the flowering. And the animal group also is divided into 2, the vertebrate and the invertebrate. I've adjusted the photo so that we can see what is down. So we can see a photo of algae here, Spirogera and those group of organisms. In the past, they used to classify them as plants. But with this modern classification, they are now under the protists. Why are they not among the plants? Is because The only plant activity they can do is to photosynthesize, make food by photosynthesis. But apart from that, they don't have roots, they don't have stems, they don't produce flowers and so on. So they don't qualify as plants. And you come to the protozoa, the animal-like protists, amoeba, paramecium, and so on. Again, they resemble animals in the sense they're capable of movement, they feed on other organisms, and so on. But there are other animal attributes that they don't have, so hence they're in their own little group. And also, if you look at all of this, they are made up of single cells. The kingdom fungi, you have a picture of the mushroom here. And don't forget bread mold and things like muco and rhizopus. They are all in that group. Some are unicellular and others are multicellular. For the plants, we have the non-flowering. Fan is an example. This you'll find normally in forests and also near swamps, where there's a lot of moisture. That's where they thrive very well. And there you have the flowering. Mango is an example there, orange and so on. And you come to the kingdom Animalia, you have the invertebrate. This picture is representing them. You have lots of insects and other things there. And the vertebrate, these are the animals that have what we know as the backbone, the vertebral column. So those are the examples, names of the examples now written: Spirogera, amoeba, mango, fern, and here you have the insect for the invertebrates. And you also have, for the vertebrates here, you have fish, reptiles, birds, mammals, toads, and man. That includes us. So that's the way these animals are classified. Let us look at plants and animals. Let's compare them. Okay? Because they all carry all these 7 characteristics of living things. They are similar in some respects, but there are some basic difference. Let's look at the mode of nutrition. It is obvious that plants are able to prepare their own food with the help of sunlight, water, and air. And with that, they're able to make food. And because they make their own food, they are known as autotrophs. Auto means self, self-feeding. They feed themselves. Animals are the opposite. They are heterotrophs. Hetero means different modes of feeding, but it doesn't include self. They don't feed themselves. What they do is they wait for the plants to process food, and then they feed on that. So they depend on plants for their food, whether it is directly or indirectly. Directly, if you go and pluck a mango and you eat that, you are eating directly the mango. But if you now go and eat a rabbit that has been eating groundnut, so you are indirectly eating the plant. So one basic difference between plant and animal is the way they feed. Plants make their own food. Animals do not make food. And they have names. Those that make their own food, the plants, we call them autotrophs. Those that don't make their food, we call them heterotrophs. And you have many different groups of the heterotrophs. And next, we look at their movement. Now, plants do not have the ability to move from one place to another, as they are rooted in the ground. Their family, in the soil, the roots hold them firmly in the ground so that they don't fall. And so because of that, they cannot do the movements that animals do. However, don't forget that plants are capable of some form of movement. This is easily seen in the form of growth. You can see the branches that were at some point, or even the plant itself, you might have noticed initially it was down there and gradually it is up there. And those that have branches that grow on the ground like potato, you will see where they start growing. After some time, you'll see them scattered all about the area there. Whereas with animals, they're capable of moving the whole body from one point to another. Food storage. Now, plants do not have the digestive system as we find in animals, and the storage of food, especially carbohydrate, takes place in the form of starch. So for plants, they store food in the form of starch. That's what you have in rice and other grains. You also have them in tubers like cassava and potato. But animals, on the other hand, they have proper digestive system, so they're able to convert the starch and then bring it into a form that is called glycogen. So this is one basic difference. Plants store starch and animals store glycogen. But of course, both of these, starch and glycogen, are different forms of carbohydrate. Cellular structure. This is another difference. Plant cellular structure contains cell wall, chloroplast, and plastids. One of the common plastid there is chloroplast is, of course, itself a plastid, and other different organelles that are found in the cell. There's cell wall, chloroplast, and other plastids. You don't find them in the animal structure. Animals don't have cell walls, they don't have chloroplasts, and they don't have the plastids. So that's the third difference between animal and plants. Response to stimuli is an interesting one too, because plants respond to stimuli like touch and light, but they are doing so generally slower and less sensitive due to the absence of sense organs. So they are much slow in responding to stimuli. Animals, on the other hand, respond fast because they have the proper nervous system and they respond to stimuli fast because of that. So animals are highly sensitive to any changes in environment. Plants rather respond very, very slowly. Growth in plants takes place throughout the life of the plant. Plants never stop growing. So long as they are alive, they continue to grow. Animal growth, we say, is definite. That means they grow up to a certain point and then they stop growing. What they do now is to continue replacing certain cells or certain tissues in the body. So next we want to look at how we group plants. Plants are grouped into two, flowering and non-flowering, and these are the basic comparison. All right, with flowering plants, they are named flowering because they produce a flower, and on the other hand, non-flowering do not produce, so hence the names. Flowering produces flower. Non-flowering does not produce flower. And the flowering plants that produce flower, we call them angiosperm, and the non-flowering, they also produce seeds, but then they are called gymnosperm. So you have angiosperm and gymnosperm. Now, all flowering plants produce seed, but when you come to the non-flowering plants, some produce seeds, others don't produce seeds. And the examples here would include the conifer trees, the pine, and those that look like those Christmas trees. You know, they have needles for their leaf. Their leaves are like needles. Others reproduce by spores instead of seeds. The moss plant and the ferns, now these ones reproduce by producing spores. So here are pictures of flowering plant, and of course with the beautiful flower. This is why they are flowering. And the non-flowering, we have the fern, and then we have the pine plants there. I mentioned the needle-like leaves. You know, the leaves are like needle, very thin, unlike other plants wherein you see big leaves. For them, they have just tiny things. All right, so that's a picture of flowering and non-flowering. Let us note that angiosperms grow seeds inside a protective shell that is called the ovary. As the plant matures, what was the ovary becomes the fruit of the plant. So this is an angiosperm because the seed grows inside the fruit. The fruit envelopes or protects the seed. On the other hand, gymnosperms, they have what are called naked seeds. You can see the seeds here. There's no fruit covering the seed. So for them, the seeds are on the outside, and there is no fruit to protect the seed. It says gymnosperms do not produce fruit. So we should note the difference here. Angiosperms, the seed is inside, covered by fruit. Gymnosperm, the seed is naked. There's no fruit covering or protecting it. So the main difference between flowering and non-flowering plants is their method of reproduction. non-flowering here, we say they rely on dispersion to continue their life cycle. Remember we said they produce spores. The spore they produce simply is released into the air, and then they depend on the wind action. So the wind will blow the spores, and whenever the spores land on a suitable environment, they need soil and moisture, wetness in the air, that will help them to start germinating, and then they grow again. But for flowering plants, they rely on pollination for reproduction. And pollination is assisted by animals like the honeybee and other things. So seeds are produced when pollen, that is the male sex cell, joins with the ovules, that is the female sex cell. So flowering plants must rely on pollination. It's very important for them. And what is pollination? It is when pollen is carried from the anther to the stigma, either by the wind, insects, or by some other means. Spores grow on the underside of fan leaves and in moss. The spores dry out and fall off the plant. They are then carried away by the wind. So once they are in the wind, they are exposed to a moist environment, the spores can begin growing into new plant. But for the seed plants, for them, they require the bringing together the male and the female sex cell so that they can join and form a new seed. And that process, we refer to it as pollination. So flowering plants, they are classified into two. Okay, we have the Monocotyledonos plants, and what are their own characteristics? One is that they have a cotyledon, and they have, thin leaves that look like straps. Okay, strap-like leaves, and they have parallel veins. So if you look at the leaf, the veins in them, they are parallel. And the flower pads, if you count the flower pads, they are in multiples of 3. So like here you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is how they are arranged. For dicots or dicotyledonos plants, they have 2 cotyledons. And if you look at the leaves are big or broad, and they have branching veins or network of veins, okay? And then the flower pads are in multiples of 4 or 5. Make it interesting by going out and checking some flowers, and then you count the flower pads. So if they're in groups of 4 or 5, you know for certain they are dicot plants. If they're multiples of 3, then those are monocots. But don't forget, 4 and 3 have a common multiple of 12. So if you have one that is 12, you now have to look for other properties to decide whether it is a dicot or a monocot. So when we come to monocot and dicot, these are the main features we can see that we can use to compare them. These are the features. So we're looking at number of cotyledons, the shape of the leaf, the vein pattern, and the flower pads. What are they divisible by? So for monocots, the number of cotyledons is 1. And for dicot, the number of cotyledon is 2. We've been saying cotyledon. What is this cotyledon? We say it's the seed leaf. If you open kola nut, for example, inside, although it is not green, it's usually white, but you'll see something in the appearance of a leaf. That's the cotyledon. So for monocots, they have 1, and basically you cannot split them like grains, rice, maize, and so on. You can't split them because they are just one body. But with those that are 2 cotyledon, you can easily split them into 2 or more parts. The shape of the leaf. This one is like a strap, like a belt. It is thin and long or narrow. And this one, the leaves, they are broad. And the vein pattern, though not very visible here, but the veins, in these ones, they run parallel. They are running alongside the leaf. And this one, they form a network, branching things, okay? So because of that, that makes this one, we describe them as branching or network. And the flower parts, what are they divisible by? For monocots, they are divisible by 3, but for dicots, they are either 5 or 4 or multiples of 4 and 5. So like if you count this one, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and others might have 10 and so on, or they will have 4, 6, 8. I mentioned already that we know 4 and 3 have a multiple of 12. So if you find a flower that is 12 or those type of numbers, now you have to look at other things like the number of, the shape of the leaf, the pattern of the veins to decide whether it is a dicot, if it is network, or parallel, then you know it is a monocot. Also, we can group plants as herbs. That is those grasses and those very little plants that hardly grow up to even a meter. They're usually less than a meter or so, or thereabout. The grasses, okay? Although, of course, elephant grass grows way taller, sometimes 2 meters and more. But most of the grasses, they don't grow very high, and they're usually soft. They can, because they are soft, that's why they cannot support the stem to grow very, very tall. And then you have the shrubs, okay? The shrubs are simply plants that grow up to 3 meters tall, okay? And beyond that, we have the trees. They grow very high. There are trees that are more than 100 meters. So this is another way we can classify plants. We said we have the herbs, we have the shrubs, and we have the trees. These are common features we can use to describe them. The herbs examples are mainly the weeds and the grasses, those little plants. When you come to shrubs, you have those that appear like small bushes, hibiscus plant or the rose plant, and the plants like in that range. Mostly you find them in the gardens, in the houses, the compounds for decorations and so on. And for trees, of course, the mango, the baobab, the palm tree, and so on. The woods, these ones don't have any wood, that hard material of the stem. They don't have any wood, and they are very soft. Now these ones, they are thick, they have wood, but they are not very hard. They are not that strong, like you find in the trees, which are thick and they are woody. That means they have a lot of wood in them. Of course, you've seen some huge trees like the baobab. That's a lot of wood, and they're very hard. You cannot easily break them because of their strength and, of course, their size. Now here, when you come, the stems do not have branches. They just grow. All of the things are just coming from the roots. So there's no stem, there's no one stem, they're all coming from the roots. But if you come here, the stems have branches at their bases, okay? So the plant will come out, and at the very base, you have stems and different branches coming up. When you come to trees, there's always a single stem, and from that, then you can have branches. And the single stem will usually grow up to a certain height before the branches will begin to manifest themselves. What we're trying to say is here, there's no branch. Here, the branches are formed right at the base, and that one, they grow as a single plant. A single stem, and later they will have branches. The herbs, they described as annuals. So they are like within 1 year, they go through their life cycles and they're done. And they're also biennials, that is, they go through within 2 years, then their lifestyle is finished. And perennials, so that means for a longer time, more than 2 years. So you have those that last only for a year, others that last for 2 years and more, and others that are more than 2 years. But if you come to the shrubs, they are mainly perennials. Most shrubs, they last for like 2 years or so. There are a few that will go beyond 2 years and more. For the trees, they are perennials. They last for many, 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 many years. And we come to the animal kingdom. Scientists have divided the animal kingdom into 2 main groups. These are the vertebrates, these animals with a backbone, and the invertebrates, animals without a backbone. These are the two main groups for the animal kingdom. Vertebrates in turn can be divided into 5 more groups. We have fish, birds, amphibians, reptiles, and mammals. So for the vertebrates, these are the 5 main groups: fish, birds, amphibians, reptiles, and mammals. So we start with the fish. Their class is fish or Pisces. It's okay to say fish. So example, we have tilapia, we have bonga. Now fish are mainly aquatic. That means they spend their life throughout their entire life. Everything about them is water. They have gills, they have fins and scales that help them to be able to live in the water. Gills for breathing, fins for swimming, and the scales for protecting the body. They have what we call a two-chambered heart. To explain this a little bit, for higher animals like us or the cow, we have 4 chambers. That means there are 4 rooms in the heart, and that is where blood is moving so that the heart will be able to pump the blood around the body. So those 4 chambers are actually used, 2 at the top and 2 at the bottom. So the 2 at the top would receive and send to the 2 at the bottom, and the 2 at the bottom will now pump the blood out of the heart so that it can reach every part of the body. But when you come to the fish, they have only 2. So that means there's only 1 for receiving and then the other 1 for pumping the blood. Now, fertilization in them is said to be external. That means it takes place outside the body of the fish. If you look at others wherein fertilization is internal, it means the egg is fertilized inside the body of the organism. But for fish, it is external. And they are oviparous. Oviparous are animals that whose eggs, when they are fertilized, the young one remains in the egg and develops into an embryo and matures into a young organism. Then it will break open the egg, which we say it is hatching. So once it hatches, the young one comes out. So oviparous organisms lay eggs. The young one develops in the egg, having nourishment in the egg itself. And when it matures, then it comes out of the egg. So these are few things about the class of animal kingdom that we call, the class of vertebrates that we call fish. They have gills, fins, scales that makes them aquatic. They're suitable, or they are able to live in water. Their heart is just two chambers, and they exhibit external fertilization, and they lay eggs. So hence we say they are oviparous. So for this class, the frog, the toad, the salamanders, and the newts, we say they are cold-blooded, which means they are not able to maintain a constant body temperature. The temperature is changing according to the environment. Hot environment, they become hot. Cold environment, they become cold. This is why you will often find them when the place is cold. You see them when the sun is coming up, they try to go out and get heat from the sun. But then if the sun is very, very hot, they will now hide in the shades to avoid getting overheated. They need water so they can breed. They undergo what we describe as metamorphosis. These are the series of changes in both the structure of the body as well as the behavior of the organism, from being tadpole, the youngest, and going all the way to becoming a young toad or a young frog. So those changes they undergo we describe as metamorphosis. Gas exchange occurs through 3 means. Now, one is the skin itself. Okay, the skin is such that gases can easily diffuse into it and go into the blood vessels. The second is they can use their mouth. They open their mouth so that they can, pump this piece of skin at the bottom of the mouth. That will act as a breathing mechanism, so they can be pumping air in and out. And then whatever air comes in, usually through the nostril, now when it dissolves in the moisture in the mouth there, then they are able to get gas, oxygen. And the last one is, can see a dot there, that is where gas is going or air goes in, and it goes into the lungs, and they are able to use that. They have balloon-like lungs that they use for breathing. And another feature about them is that fertilization is external. I explained that already. External fertilization means the eggs are fertilized outside the body of the organism. Oviparous, they lay eggs. And then, interestingly, they have a 3-chambered heart. That means, unlike the fish that have 2, and unlike higher organisms like us that have 4, they are in between. They have 3. And how that works is something very interesting. We come to the next group, the class Reptilia. Now, this is where you have the turtles, the snakes, the lizards, the crocodiles. Again, like the amphibia, they are cold-blooded, which means, again, they cannot maintain a constant body temperature. The opposite of cold-blooded is warm-blooded. It means the body temperature remains the same. It's constant all the time, like us. So because they are cold-blooded, they must bask, which means they must go out, lie on the rocks or walls and get heat from the sun when the place is cold. But also they must hide. When the place is very, very hot, they must hide under shades. By so doing, they regulate their body temperature. They control their body temperature so that it's around a certain average. It's not too hot, it's not too cold. They have a scaly, waterproof skin. So their body is covered with scale, and that scale makes the body waterproof so that water does not go in and water does not come in except through the openings in the body. Why is this important? You know, they are living on land. And when you're on land, one of the biggest problems you have is how do you conserve water. So by having scales that act as waterproof, that helps them so that they don't lose too much water. Now we begin to see them breathing through the lungs only. They don't use any other means except the lungs. So that means air must go through the nostrils or the mouth and then enter into the lungs, and they breathe with that. We also meet internal fertilization, which simply means the eggs are fertilized inside the body. They have eggs that are described as amniotic. Amniotic meaning there is a membrane, a tissue inside which you have the egg or the young embryo growing, which helps to protect it. In addition, it is protected by a leathery, soft but tough shell. Okay, so that has helped them, particularly to help conserve water, because when they lay the eggs, there is the danger that the eggs will dry out. But because of the amniotic sac that is around the eggs, and because it is a little bit soft and leathery, it is capable of absorbing moisture from the surrounding, and hence it's able to survive. They are oviparous, and they are ovoviviparous, and plus they are viviparous, depending on the type of species. We explain oviparous, that means they lay egg, the young will develop through that egg. Now, ovoviviparous means the eggs are kept inside the body of the organism after it is fertilized, and the organism will develop there and hatch, and when they hatch, then they come out. So that's why it's a combination of the name. You'll see here oviparous and here viviparous. Now, ovoviviparous is like a combination of the two. They lay eggs, but these eggs are not laid outside the body. They are laid inside, or they are kept inside the body, and the young will develop, and once it is mature, it hatches, that is, break the egg shells, and then it comes out. So when you meet such organisms, that's why you might have heard some people saying, they say snakes give birth. Some snakes. It's not like, well, the birth we see in other organisms, but the fact is that the eggs develop inside the body of the organism. So that's ovoviviparous. And once the egg matures, it hatches, and then you see live young ones coming out. Viviparous simply means the embryo grows inside the body of the organism. And once it is mature, then it comes out as a live organism. So these are the three terms. Oviparous, they lay eggs. Ovoviviparous, eggs are fertilized but kept in the body and they will hatch and come out. Viviparous, once the eggs are fertilized, other tissues come up or that develop in which the young one develops, and once it is mature, then it has to come out of the body of the organism alive. So we're saying for reptilia or the reptiles, they exhibit all these three depending on what type, what species we are looking at. But for the lizard, they practice oviparous, right? That's the only way they lay eggs. For the number of chambers in the heart, it can be 3 or it can be 4 because you have a diverse group of reptiles. Finally, or next, we look at the class Aves, or simply known as the birds. Again, like these are warm-blooded. Now, I already explained cold-blooded mean they cannot maintain constant body temperature. Warm-blooded, they maintain constant body temperature. Birds have 4 chambers, just like us, the higher animals. Fertilization, like in the reptiles, is internal. They lay eggs, oviparous. They have amniotic eggs with calcareous hard shells. This means they have calcium in the cells that makes them very hard. Okay, not so hard because they can easily break, but they are hard compared to those of the reptiles, which are soft and leather-like. And again, that's also very important because it stops or it helps to prevent them from losing water. You know, for them, the eggs are not laid in the soil where it is moist. They are laid on soft something out above the ground. So they must have something that is going to prevent them losing water. They have cloaca. The cloaca is a single opening that serves for the passage of feces, urine, and semen, or in the case of the female, for the entrance of, urine passes out, feces passes out, but then it's also the same space or same hole that receives semen from the male. And that structure is called the cloaca. It's just one opening that is serving for all those 3 functions. They have beaks. That's the mouth modified into a honey, something a little bit hard, so that it's, in fact, very hard, because you've seen or you might have known of some birds that actually dig holes in trees, and they have claws that help them to, grab things, climb even trees sometimes, hang onto things, and they are the only organism with feathers. Okay, the feathers, scientists say, these are actually scales that have modified or changed themselves into something else, which helps the birds for flight, and it also helps for insulation. So it keeps the birds warm, and then it helps them whenever they want to fly. So briefly, that's about the aves, or the birds. They're warm-blooded. They have 4 chambered heart. Fertilization is internal. They lay eggs. They have amniotic eggs with hard shells. They have a single opening for the passage of everything. They have beaks and claws that help them in their life, and they are the ones that are capable of flight. Finally, we look at the class Mammalia. That includes us humans, bears, pigs, horses, and a lot more. We are warm-blooded. Like I said before, it means we're capable of keeping a constant body temperature. Sometimes there is a misconception that when you say warm-blooded, it means the body is always warm. Not necessarily the body is warm. It's like we're able to keep a constant body temperature. If the place is cold, we have a certain body temperature we maintain. If the place is very high, we still maintain the same body temperature. We don't go high because the place is hot, or we don't go down, cold because the place is cold. Our body is always at a certain body temperature. We have hair on our body, and also a layer of fat to help us conserve or to keep heat so that we don't lose heat, because we need that heat to keep a constant body temperature. But of course, in addition to that, we are capable of generating heat by chemical reactions in the body. Our body can undergo chemical reaction that produce a lot of heat, and the body is able to conserve that heat so that it's capable of keeping us warm. We got our name from mammary glands. The females possess these mammary glands that produce milk to feed the offspring. So this is where we got the name mammals. Of course, we exhibit internal fertilization. But then we have a lot of different groups. Some of them actually practice oviparous. There are some mammals that lay eggs, but the majority of mammals are viviparous, which means they actually, after the eggs are fertilized, they develop structures in which the baby will develop and mature. And once the baby is mature, that is fully grown, has all the body parts that are required, then the baby comes alive out of the body of its parent, mother. Interestingly, we have a diaphragm for increased respiration and spongy lungs for increased surface area. These things are very important when it comes to respiration. So this is why mammals generally have a higher amount of energy. And finally, like the birds, we also have a four-chambered heart. Having a four-chambered heart makes it, makes pumping the blood and, sending the blood everywhere around the body and receiving it very efficient. It's very good at separating blood with oxygen and blood without oxygen. More about that later on. We want to look at animals without backbones. We call them the invertebrates. We have a lot of examples here. The water sponge, the sea anemone, the earthworm, centipede, the common housefly, the crab or the spider. We have the crawfish, sea urchin, sea gooseberry, and the whelk. And so we have a bunch of them. They all can't fit here. These animals with a backbone. But we also place them into groups. First group we have is the mollusk. These are invertebrates that have a soft body and a shell. Now, if you look at a picture of a mollusk, like the ones we have here, they have a soft body, and for protection they create or they produce a shell, some of them, and that helps to protect them. Most of them live in water. Others, like the snails and the slugs, they live on land, but they must live where it is moist or wet. Some stay in one place and others float in the water. Some of them, few of them may have shells inside their body to help provide some kind of strength, like a skeleton. But briefly, for the mollusks, the most important thing to notice is that they have a soft body and which they protect by creating a shell. So we have all these examples here, the octopus, and I can't just make up these ones. Next group, we look at the arthropods. This is the biggest group. Why they are called arthropods? Because they have jointed legs, and their bodies are also jointed. Their body is divided into three sections: a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. They are the largest group of invertebrates, and hence they have a lot of subgroups. They have exoskeleton. That means the skeleton is on the outside of the body. To give you a clear contrast or comparison, if you come to high animals like the mammals, the skeleton, the bones are inside and the bones are covered with flesh. But for them, the flesh is inside and the body itself is covered with the skeleton. That's exoskeleton. There are four major groups we are going to look at: the insects, the arachnids, the crustaceans, and one group that the centipedes and the millipedes belong to, that we call the myriapods. So for the insects, what is common to them is they have a pair of antennae, okay, those things that look like the antenna of the radio or so. In fact, it's actually the radio that borrowed the name from the insect. They have three pairs of legs, and they may have one pair or two pairs of wings that they use for flight, those that can fly. And like we said, their body is divided into three sections. You have a head, you have the thorax, the chest region, and then you have an abdomen. So here are some examples of beautiful insects. The next group are the arachnids. The spider is very common in the home, okay? But it's the same family as the scorpion. So the scorpion and the spider, they're in the same family in the sense that they have 4 to 5 pairs of legs. Majority of them actually have 4 pairs, because in some of them, the one that is like the 5th pair is actually now modified into something like something for like the senses, you know, like for grasping. Sometimes they are involved in the reproductive process or whatever. But if you look at the legs proper, you count, you have 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, like we said, 4 or 5 pairs because the 5th pair is now modified into something else and it's not used now as a leg. But there are others wherein the 4 pair is very, very clear. If you come to the scorpion, you can actually count 1, 2, 3. The 4th one is now modified into a claw for defense and for capturing things, but also it can also be used for helping in the movement when it is necessary, or for like acting as a support. And some of them have things we call fangs. This is something for keeping poison. And for the poisonous ones, like some spiders, they use the fangs to, you know, inject poison into organisms they want to feed on. Also, they can use it to defend themselves. If some organisms want to attack them or eat them, they can use the fangs to inject poison in them, and that way they might be able to protect and keep themselves safe. Next group is the crustaceans. They have 2 pairs of antennae. Now you have to be careful because if we go back, we met antennae in insects. When you come to the arachnids, there are no antennas. When you come to the crustaceans, they have 2 pairs of, for them it's 2 pairs. The insect, they have only a pair. Their body might be 2 or 3 sections. So there are some that is only a head and the rest of the body. There are others wherein you have a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. They are capable of chewing, and they have clearly 5 pairs of legs. Okay, so like you have here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Again, in some of them, the 5th pair might be modified for something like clasping or holding things, but clearly you will see these are actually legs. So for these groups of organisms, we need to simply try to remember whether they have antenna or not, the body division, is it 2 or 3, and how many pairs of legs do they have. Remember, they are all in the group of arthropods. And then we have the myriapods. That is the group to which the centipedes and the millipedes belong to. Now, what is common here? Centipedes, they have 1 pair of legs on each body section. Their bodies are divided, or their bodies are made up of many pieces. If you look at this one, okay, you have several pieces that make up the body. And so for them, they have a pair of legs on each body part. And what distinguishes them? For centipedes, it's 1 on each body. For millipedes, it is 2 pairs of legs. So centipedes are the ones that have few legs, like this guy here. And millipedes, you'll actually, if you look closely, you can see 2 pairs on each body. So they have a lot of legs on them. The other group of invertebrates are the worms, okay? And again, here we have 3 main groups: the flatworms, the roundworms, and the segmented worms. As the names describe them, flatworms, these are flat, and their biological name is Platyhelminthes. They have flat bodies, as the name goes. They have a head and a tail, and most of them are said to be harmless. Harmless in the sense they live on their own. They don't need to depend on other organisms. But there are some of them that live inside the bodies of some other organisms. And there, they might be causing some harm, because if they are going to be inside your body, then they must be taking their food from you. So that's the flatworms. From the name, you know they have flat bodies. The roundworms, again, these are round in nature, but they are like cylindrical tubes. Some can be very long. And They have thin bodies with pointed heads. Both the head and the tail, they are pointed. And they have just a one-way digestion system. From the head to the mouth is just one tube from the head to the mouth. And that is what they use for digestion. Now, most of these roundworms live inside the bodies of other animals. They live as parasites. Now, this one is a goat, probably a human goat, and you can see how these worms have, overcrowded there because they reproduce themselves at a very high rate. And if this happens, they sometimes block the goat. Food cannot pass, and that person might suffer some serious situation. They might even lead to that. This is a collection of some roundworms. And then we come to the segmented worms. Their group name is Annelida. They have 3 layers, and and the body is divided into several segments. Okay, that when we say 3 layers, it means like, think of it like a tube, and that is having 3 layers wrapped around each one. They have a head, a clear head, and a tail, and both of them, just like the previous ones, they have just one tube inside that starts from the mouth and ends at the anus. Now, they live only on the land or the soil. There is none of them that live inside other animals' body. The earthworm is in this group. This is not an earthworm though, but it's another segmented body. Earthworm is in this group, and they live on their own. And another group of the invertebrates, we have the Cylindricates or Cnidarian. They are animals that have something like branches, arms, that we call tentacles. Some of them are poisonous, like this one here. They usually sting or put some kind of poison into their prey. That's how they feed. And the same thing they do for enemies, something that wants to eat them or wants to disturb them, they'll sting you. And there are some that are very dangerous. If they sting even humans, they can kill you. Some stay in one place, but like this guy, he moves around, floats in the water. It can go up and down and everywhere. So that's the Cylindricates. Cylindricates means something like a body with a hollow structure inside. And most importantly, they have tentacles that they use for movement and for capturing prey. Sponges or porifera, they are the simplest kind of the invertebrates. Now, most times they don't move, they are in one place. And often if you visit them in the water, deep sea or some other areas, you might confuse them for plants because they even look more like plants. But actually, the name porifera simply means a tube with a hole. Okay, they look like some tube sitting with a hole in it. They are shaped like a sac with an opening at the top. The body is made up of a 2-cell layer, and it is hollow inside. Okay, they live in water. The adults stay in one place, and but their young ones, they are not yet attached, so they can be floating until they can also find somewhere they can now attach themselves and stay there permanently. So that ends our lesson for today, and I thank you for being with me throughout the lesson. I hope you learned something, and we'll meet again for another lesson sooner.